Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today is a very fun video. I'm going to be sharing the process of how I clean my skulls and ultimately why I have chosen to go about cleaning skulls in the way I do. So before we get into it, I wanted to show you my two skulls that I finished recently. This is my first skull, this one. So this one is from one of my Icelandic ewes. I had purchased 3 Icelandic ewes in the fall of, I guess it would have been 2021. The one ewe ended up getting stress pneumonia just from, of course, the stress of moving to a new farm, the new sounds, new animals, everything all together was a huge step for her. We were able to get her to the vet, and the vet had given us some things to give to her in hopes of assisting and getting her back in her health. Fortunately, that did not work. She was already sheared by the time she came down with this after I got her, which meant that she did not have a skin, so she was not worth me skinning her and getting off her hide so that I could salt it and tan it in the future. However, those of you familiar with Icelandic sheep will know that Icelandics have beautiful curled horns, as you can see. Her horns were wonderful. I was like, I cannot throw out her skull. So I got my dad to cut off her head for me because, of course, this was my first sheep that died. And I could not bring myself to do that myself. I was also just like freshly 14. There's no way 14-year-old me would have done that. So my dad did that for me. I tossed her skull in the freezer and came back to it later on and finished her. So she was my first skull. So this is Willow. I had named her Willow. She's beautiful. I love her. And yeah, this is pretty nice. This other one is also an Icelandic skull. This one is from Zeus. Zeus was one of my ram lambs born on the farm in the spring of 2022. He would have been coming on 3 years old. So Zeus was out of Gwen, one of the girls I still have. I had sold Zeus to a lady who was just getting into sheep. She ended up selling her flock a few months after, in the early fall. She had contacted me and said that she would love if she could bring Zeus back to me. I told her I would take Zeus, and the plan was that I was going to rehome him. I kind of fell in love with him, so I decided I was just gonna keep him. He lived with my meat lambs for a while. My meat lambs were on the opposite side of my ram pen, which was fine. He was a ram lamb. He was still intact. He did have hormones, but of course not crazy, as he hadn't been with any ewes prior to that. Once he got a little bit older, it was a little bit later into the fall, the early winter time. When my rams were on the other side of the fence, the older boys started to fight with Zeus through the fence, and I don't know exactly what had happened. Kinda am assuming that they fought through the fence. Zeus wailed his head, obviously, off the fence. He ended up going almost like brain dead, like he had no understanding of what was going on. He lost his eyesight, so he was blind. He was just at the point where he could no longer be in a flock. I decided that it'd probably be best to have him processed. I was worried that although I was going to keep him, how would he do in a herd if he cannot see or find things? I put my flock out on pasture, and if he can't find his way back, I cannot go out and search for him. It just doesn't make sense, and he's just gonna lose where he is, and I don't know what that could lead to. So I decided to have him processed. It meant that he no longer was suffering, that he was also able to put meat on tables to nourish bodies, and with that I got back his hide and his skull. So I pulled out his skull last summer. Willow and his skull were 2 of the first skulls that I did. But that's Zeus's skull, so he's really nice too. My 2 first ones that I had, that I cleaned, and they turned out really well. So, yeah. Personally, I am super passionate about whole animal use and using as much of the animal as I possibly can while honoring their life even after death. Being able to have these opportunities to utilize their hide and their skull as well as their organs. It's been literally the biggest blessing in the time of me raising sheep and having sheep. I'm grateful that I'm able to do all these things while also sharing my knowledge with you guys who are wanting to also be able to honor your animal and learn how to do all of these things. To get into the process of how I clean my skulls, first thing is, of course, you need to find a way to keep your skull from not rotting. As with many things in the world of taxidermy and such, best way to preserve something is to toss it in the freezer, because when you toss it in the freezer, it causes it from not breaking down, like it stops it. It's really gross. But for people who maybe have lost an animal, like a dog or a cat, like a pet animal, if you were hoping that you could bury them in the ground and it is during the winter time, you can toss them inside a box or something, toss it in the freezer, and then come back later and then you could bury it. So I know the same if you're thinking of a hide or a skull. I know that is a very gross reference, but tossing things in the freezer is a really good way to keep it at the state it's at, and then you can come back to it. This is what I do with a lot of my skulls. Because I process most of my animals in the fall or early winter, it of course is not summertime, and I do not want to be cleaning skulls in the winter time when it is minus 40. I don't really have a spot necessarily indoors that is good for this. Of course, cleaning skulls is bloody and it's gross and it is just like stinky and not very nice to deal with indoors. It's really great that I can just toss my skulls in the freezer and then come back to it later in the summertime. So this is what I do in my process. However, if it was summertime, then I would go about it a little bit differently, and then I would probably just start my skulls, then toss them in the compost pile and let the bugs and stuff go at it already. There are a few ways you can go about cleaning skulls. I just mentioned before, the way of cleaning skulls is that I toss them into a compost or manure pile. I toss it into like the compost manure pile. So we take some of the pig and sheep poop from the back after we clean our pens. We just toss it into a pile, some straw on it and all that stuff. Bugs love that stuff and they go crazy for it, which is literally the best place to put them. You can also let your skull soak in a bucket of water. When you let it soak for an extended period of time, the water sitting on your skull essentially breaks down everything that is on there and it falls off. I'm not sure the exact amount of time that it takes to do that, as I'm not familiar enough with it, as I haven't researched it, and of course I have not gone through that process. Do know that it is an extended period of time because of course the water has to break it down off of your skull. So that is also an option. Pretty sure that cleans your skull entirely, and I don't think you need to do any other steps included in that process. Another way to go about it is that if you have a space that you can put a small cage inside your house, you may toss some beetles in there, and beetles are a great thing to clean your skull. I know lots of people who clean their skulls that way, however, I do not have space for that. Beetles are a really good thing to do because you can toss your skull in there any time of the year and the beetles can go at it and clean it. And the final way is that you can boil your skulls clean. Decided ultimately to go the path of putting my skulls in the compost pile, which I find has worked wonderful for me, especially when I was first learning how to do this, because when you put them into the pile, the bugs do most of your work in just a few weeks time, and then your job is made easy. Your skull will sit in your compost pile for a few weeks. My skulls are like 2 to 4 weeks. It depends on what is on your skull still when you put it into the pile. If you decide to skin off most of your stuff, of course that time will shorten because there's not as much to clean off of your skull. If you're tossing your skull right in there and it's still got the eyeballs and it's still got everything left intact on your skull, it will take longer because the bugs have more to clean off. 2 to 4 weeks is kind of the time frame, and then more, of course, dependent on climate and what's on there and all that. Mine are around that, as I do take off quite a bit of stuff on it. After it is sat for like 2 to 4 weeks, at this point the eyeballs, brain, everything in the nose and ears will also be cleaned out of your skull. Most of the flesh will be off the bones, and the horn sheaths will start to lift off of your skulls. Horn sheaths are these. What I also was very unfamiliar with before I started researching skulls is that these come off and there is a bone underneath of here. I don't know why I didn't think of that beforehand, but after your skull has sat in your pile for enough time, the bugs will have gone around the whole entire bone of your horn, and they have cleaned it enough, the sheath slide right off. That's also a good determining point when you know that your skull is ready to move to the next step when the sheaths have came off. Though the sheaths can be removed when you boil your skull later, I found it is made much easier if you let your skull sit in the compost pile and let the bugs take off your horn sheaths, because then you don't have to worry about accidentally boiling down your horns. Heat of the water can boil your horns, so that's important to note. After your skull has sat in the compost pile and has been cleaned for the most part, we can move on to step 2. So step 2 is to pull out your pressure washer and pressure wash anything that is still stuck on your skull. If you do not have access to a pressure washer, you can also use a garden hose with an end attachment on it with really high pressure. Will not clean it as efficiently, of course, as a pressure washer because there is not enough pressure. It should help you a little bit to get off some of the tougher stuff that hasn't been removed quite well by the bugs, or maybe is just hanging on by a little thread. I have a small area set up outside of the well shed. It works really good because the hose doesn't have to go very far to it, and it is nice and close. I can run to turn off the water and turn on the water and all of that. I have placed a cement pad on the ground, which is wonderful. Having the cement pad there means that I can set my skull in there. The skull's not directly on the ground, so when I'm spraying off the skull, I'm not kicking up dirt and grass bits. My skull is staying clean the whole entire time as I'm trying to clean it off, and I'm not dealing with not only the flesh trying to get off, but also all the nastiness that is flying up from the ground. I'll continue to spray my skull until the skull has become mostly clean. You'll find that your pressure washer is not able to take off everything, which is totally fine. And when we move on to step 3, we are going to boil your skull, and boiling it will remove most of the stuff that is still really stuck on there, as it will break down what is really stuck on there. When I first started cleaning skulls, I thought that I could get away with tossing it in the compost pile, pressure washing it, and then it would be clean. I found for the most part, those 2 steps aren't quite enough to get everything off. So I incorporated boiling my skulls into this process. Boiling is step 3. Boiling your skulls is follow through in the process of bringing your water to a boil. You are going to pop your skull into the water. Make sure you do not put in your sheaths. If your sheaths did not come off in the beginning, they will come off when you boil your skull. If you do have the sheaths on there, toss your skull in there, check on it every so often. Keep pulling at the horn sheath to see if it pulls off. If it does, then take it out, pull it off, and then you can pop it back in there. So I will set a timer for about every 20 minutes, use tongs to lift it out, check my skull. I use tweezers to pull the flesh to see how well it is coming off. Once I'm able to remove essentially everything off my skull, I know that the boiling is done and we're good. Once everything is basically removed, then I can move on to step 4, which is pressure washing one final time to remove anything that may still be stuck on there. Boiling has now broken down most of the stuff, so now when you pressure wash it, it should just essentially fly right off. Step 4, final pressure washing. So this is followed through in the same way as the first time. You are going to want to clean your skull until everything has came off and your skull is completely clean. It's important to ensure that you make sure that you are spraying up into all of the parts of your skull to make sure everything comes off clean. You want to make sure that you are spraying up into the nasal cavity, where the brain would have been, as well as your eye sockets and such. You do not want anything left on your skull, of course, as you do not want your skull to rot in the future. If there is anything left on your skull, it's not going to finish the way that you want it to, which would not be good after you've gone through this whole process. Your skull has been pressure washed clean, then you are going to allow it to sit until it is fully dry. Once it is fully dry, then we can move on to step 5. Step 5 is now we are going to wash our horns, make sure that there's nothing in the horn sheaths before we glue them back on. To clean my horns, I will fill up a warm and soapy container. I'll take a toothbrush and I will rub out everything in the horns, as well as over your bathtub. If you fill up your horns, there's an opening at the top, of course, on your horns where they will slide back onto your skull. Just keep filling them up with water and dumping it out until the horn runs clean. Take your toothbrush, scrub the inside with soap, the outside with soap, rinse it off. Once it is completely clean, there's not any greasiness, no dirt left on it, then they're good. Let them dry. Once they're dry, then we can glue them back on. Before adding your sheaths back onto your skull, this is a step you really want to make sure you do. Please make sure that they slide back onto the bone before you glue them. I have had the problem before where they do not slide on very well and you need to sand down the horn before you can slide it back on. If you do need to do that, you can just take a piece of sandpaper and work around the whole outside of it. Just keep checking it. Does the horn sheath slide back on? Does it need to be sanded more? When it slides back on, you are good to go, and then you can glue it. I wish I had a horn to show you. I do not want to put glue on the actual bone. You could to maybe glue it a little bit better, but I find if you put a little, just put glue around like right at the edge of your horn sheath and slide it on. Hold it in place until it is really stuck there, and then you're good to go. Do it for both. Do it for both horns. I use crazy glue, like Gorilla Glue, because I find it's really sticky and it works really good. You, of course, do not want your horns to fall off, and you don't want to have to re-glue them or anything like that, so just ensure you have really good glue and make sure that they're fully stuck on there. Follow through these steps, of course, with both horns, making sure your horns glide on, sound down if needed, and then glue them back on. Once your horns are glued, then we can move on to sealing our skull. I do know that there is a few different like finishers that you can use to seal your skull. I use Mod Podge because it paints on really easily, and you can find Mod Podge anywhere. Just take a small little bit on a paintbrush and I just brush it all over my skull, making sure to, of course, get into the eye sockets, as well as you're going to brush down in here and just kind of everywhere, because of course you want it to all be sealed nicely. You may want to put a little bit around your horns, but I found it doesn't brush very well onto your horns, and your horns are totally fine without anything, so don't really worry about your horns. Just make sure that your whole skull is covered in your finisher, whatever you may choose to use. I try and do at least 2 coats on it, and then I'll allow the skull to dry before I decide if I want it mounted or if I just want it on a desk somewhere or a dresser or whatever. That is my process of cleaning skulls. I researched and played around a little bit. While I did choose to put my skulls in the compost pile, I definitely did choose what works best for me and figured out what works best as I go. Though this process may not work the best for somebody else, this works best for me. What I found works good to clean my skulls. This is just my like made up process. Although I did follow the compost pile, I got a few little processes within it. So this is what works best for me, and I've had lots of luck, so I hope you guys try this. I'd love to hear your feedback if you guys do decide to go the path of following along to my process. I just love cleaning skulls, so I'm glad that I'm able to share this with you guys for all of you looking to try something new and jump out of your comfort zone. Before I finish this video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a few important things that is really good to know when you are cleaning your skulls. The first big thing is to ensure that you are checking on your skull every few days when it is in the compost pile, so you can ensure that your bones are not beginning to fall apart. When I had my first skull in the compost pile, I had left it for too long that the bugs were starting to eat at the front on the nose. The bones just fell off and I lost the whole front piece of the skull. That was a fault on my end for not checking it. When I offer advice to people when they come to me asking, I'm like, please check your skull. That was terrible, and I hated that, and I was very upset with myself that I did not check on it more than I did. So just ensure you're checking on it to make sure that the bugs don't break down your bones too much for your liking, and that you know for sure when your skull is ready to be moved on to the next step. Another big thing is to make sure that when you are boiling your skull, you need to check on it frequently. When you have your skull soaking in the boiling water is breaking down your skull because it's trying to remove any flesh, and if it is left for too long, it is going to break down your bones, and of course you do not want your bones broken down. You don't want them broken down, but you also don't want them melted, which is 2 things that the hot water can do to your skulls. So just ensure that you are checking on it about every 20 minutes while it is in there. Once the water is boiling, it usually is pretty quick that your skull is able to come out of the water. As long as you keep an eye on it, then you're good to go. Cleaning skulls has become such a huge passion of mine. I'm so happy that I decided to take that jump out of my comfort zone and try something new. Overall, very happy that I'm able to honor the animal in more ways than purchased one through their hide. I'm also able to get back their skulls and organs, so this is just beautiful and makes my heart so happy. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, please make sure to leave them down in the comments and I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and you can find me on all social medias at Prairie Shepherdess. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day.